All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for the Recruiting and Developing the Workforce of the Future panel. Before I introduce the panelists, just a few housekeeping remarks. First, you should have those index cards at your seats. That's how we will be collecting questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please write them down and raise your hand or hold up the card, and some of the folks here will collect them, and then we'll work those into the discussion over the course of the panel. Please don't wait until the end to do that. As soon as you have questions, feel free to jot them down and get them in, and we'll get them integrated in. Second, there are no continuing education credit units for this panel, which is ironic given it's about workforce development, but just FYI. Reminder, there may be media here present in the room, so please keep that in mind. So with that, let me go ahead and get things kicked off. So my name is Charles Clancy. I'm with the MITRE Corporation, and I'm excited to be serving as the moderator for this panel. This is an area of personal interest of mine because I've only been at MITRE for 3 months. Before that, I was a professor at Virginia Tech, where national security workforce was one of the core missions of the center that I led. So I'm excited to be moderating the panel today on that topic. So quickly, the panelists, we have Colonel Jen Sovada, who is the Chief of ISR Talent Management for the Air Force. We have Loren DeJonge Schulman, who is the Deputy Director for Studies at the Center for New American Security. Cece Durall, who's the Acting Deputy DNI for Human Capital, and Donny Weber, who is the Chief of External Recruitment for NSA. And not that kind of recruitment, the other kind of recruitment. I don't know if that's ever been confusing for people anyway. So with that, I'd like to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and make a few opening remarks, and then we'll get into some of the Q&A. So Jen, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Colonel Jen Sovada. I am, as he said, the Chief of Talent Management for Air Force Intelligence, and I am responsible for the workforce retention and development for about 35,000 people across the Air Force ISR enterprise, and that includes officers, enlisted, and civilians. I'm a career intel officer, so this is my first foray into human capital or talent management, besides just doing it in my normal day-to-day job, and have led large organizations and have also participated in most intel community national agencies.
Do we want to do opening remarks too, or just introduction?
But both, if you have.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, go.
Opening remarks? Okay. Yep. So for us, the Air Force ISR enterprise has undergone a large talent management shift. We have gone from what we call career field management in the last 8 months, where it was put a body in a billet and hope to God that they know what they're doing, to actually looking at each individual person as someone who has a core capability or has the ability to be successful in something that they would like to do, is something that also that we have a mission need for. So the workforce is shifting. We're looking at how do we do that in order to retain our best talent, and how then do we develop those people to want to stay, want to do other jobs, as well as continue to progress in their careers.
Right. I'm Loren Schulman. I'm presently at a think tank called the Center for New American Security, but I spent 10 years prior to that in the national security workforce in the federal government, both as a DoD civilian, but also working at the National Security Council as a career civil servant. And I do work on the broader national security workforce, not exclusively on the intelligence community, so I'm going to speak slightly more broadly than some of the other panelists today. So I'm going to talk about the things that worry me and keep me up at night, and then also my fantasy world of national security talent management. The things that keep me up at night is that despite the pockets of greatness, including the folks on the panel with me in terms of creative talent management strategies, the federal government is, in my view, not on track to hire, retain, develop, or promote the diverse and skilled civilian national security workforce that it needs today. It can change, but it has a lot of work to do. The tools and the benefits and the incentives that it needs to be able to build that workforce have fallen far behind. We know what a lot of them are and have chosen not to pursue them both in Congress and at the federal agency level. And that there is a toxic rhetoric around public service, particularly career civil servants, but not exclusively, also contractors, intelligence analysts, and others, that paints them as lazy or untrustworthy or disloyal or often less valued than the military counterparts, that is incredibly harmful to building that workforce that we need today. Okay, so that's the depressing part. In my fantasy world of U.S. government talent management for the national security sector, which a lot of the folks on the panel with me I know are pursuing activities like this, whenever we had a national security strategy or any kind of sub-strategy of the kind, human capital would be at the very top of that strategy of what kind of people we need to actually effectuate it. Because without the people, the artificial intelligence and the competition with China and everything else that we want to accomplish as a nation are impossible. And I want leaders that actually recognize that from the get-go. At confirmation hearings, I would want to see 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even longer dedicated to what are you going to do, Mr. Secretary or General so-and-so, to actually build the workforce that we need to accomplish the priorities that you're articulating right now, and have hard questioning to that effect. I would want to see line managers given all the training and resources they need to understand how to recruit and build and promote and develop the workforce that they need today. Because while many of the tools that are necessary to them are actually exist, whether in authority or policy, a lot of managers just don't know about them and haven't had access to the kind of training they need. Similarly, the human capital team are as understaffed and as overwhelmed with opportunity today as that they ever could be. There's so much more that they need in terms of training, resources, and backup to kind of help build the workforces that they require, and we can give them a lot more support than they do. And then I guess the last three elements of my fantasy world would be to have more flexibility in the national security workforce than we do today. There's all kinds of ways to go in and out of the national security workforce, and I know that a lot of the folks here in this audience have undertaken them. But they are all a choose-your-own-adventure where it feels like you're going to get it wrong over and over again, and doors are slammed in your face, not because of your lack of talent, but because of bureaucracy. I want the bureaucracy to stop slamming the door in the face. If we're not ready to promote somebody or hire somebody, great. But if we need them, we should have the means to be able to bring them in the level at the time period that we need. I would want to see readiness of the civilian workforce and the contractor workforce be as important to our members of Congress and others as we see in the military side, where readiness is something that we talk about all the time in congressional hearings, but never on the civilian side is that as much of a challenge that Congress articulates. And then lastly, I want the fallacy that poor performers in the civilian national security workforce it's not possible to fire them. It's possible to do all kinds of things in the civilian workforce. This is a myth that has gone on for ages and ages, and we can manage our workforce, develop it, promote it, get rid of some of it if we need to in ways that are a lot more accessible and approachable than I think a lot of folks in the community need today. And that's my fantasy world, and we can talk about how to get there later on.
Thank you, Loren. Hi, I'm CC Durall. So I've been in the community for over 25 years, came in as a linguist, became an analyst, and then have navigated a very exciting career, at least from my perspective. I've had an opportunity to work in a multitude of different agencies. When I hear Loren describing a fantasy, a future landscape for our community and our workforce, I think we're building that now. So hopefully I'll give you some rest by the end of the panel as I talk a little bit more about that. But let me start with saying that the 2019 National Intelligence Strategy, it has a particular objective, a goal that's cited clearly about forging and retaining a diverse, inclusive, and expert workforce to address enduring and emerging requirements and enable mission success. So that was signed out at the beginning of this calendar year, and we've been moving out as a community towards building that workforce, investing in that workforce, and trying to bring in the talent that we need today and for the future. We have a particular objective that you'll hear more about throughout this panel that I'll cite to, which is called the Right Trusted Agile Workforce. And that is where we're talking about ensuring that we have the right workforce at the right time in the right place. We want to be able to bring and invite those of you who are out there in the audience today and many of you who are out across the country to come in and contribute your talent. So to your comment about, making it more fluid, that's what we're trying to do when we talk about the agility and the right trusted agile workforce. We're working very closely with our security partners. You'll hear there's a panel later on this afternoon with some of my peers will be on it. We'll be talking about how we're trying to expedite and make, make it easier and make it more expedient in terms of bringing people on board. Because I know that that's some of the frustration from some folks. They want to contribute their talent, they want to bring everything they can bring to bear, but they're waiting and waiting for months and maybe years to bring that in. So we're working very hard on that. We're trying to weave in automation, looking at our private sector partners in terms of some of the work that they've been doing with regards to bringing in automation to kind of expedite some of our processes as well. So I'll talk more in detail and specifics about the recruitment and development aspect of that. But let me say that we are trying to build a different employee experience for our current workforce, as well as really entice and make it easier for that future talent to come on board.
So now I'm just scared. So first off, I'm just feeling very fortunate and humble to be actually the minority gender on the panel, just saying. I would also say Donny Weber, the Chief of Recruitment for the National Security Agency, and I did have similar humble beginnings as a recruit for the Air Force, spent 20 years in the Air Force as a linguist, a reporter. I was able to have a stint at a really hardship tour in Monterey, California as a faculty development specialist for foreign language education. I then had the foray and opportunity to go into public affairs for the National Security Agency, and then transitioned in as a civilian in 2003. I've been in the community for 36 years, and so what I see is evolution and change happening. It is slow, I will tell you that. It is absolutely the truth. Managers and line managers need some of the development opportunities that they've not been able to get in the past, and largely because they're not, and I won't say just in a pejorative way, but they're not just leaders, they're working managers. They're doing mission as well, and the mission is critical and it is overwhelming at times. So the challenge is helping them to manage that level of workload. I would say that the recruits that I see, this is the job, my dream job. This is my dream place to be. I say that because I left recruitment 9 years ago as the deputy chief because I was unable to dethrone the chief of recruitment there. It just wasn't my turn, I guess. It took me 9 years and 3 tours in Georgia to be able to get to this dream position. And I will tell you one thing that I'm excited about. Now, whether we can retain them, that's the other part of Loren's, I think, conversation, is that the youth of this country is as committed to keeping this nation safe as we were. I remember joining the Air Force in 1983 and being told that was the end of the Air Force because of our generation. We didn't have the same commitment, and yet the Air Force still exists, as it's clearly at the end of the side of this table. So we didn't kill the Air Force, and the current youth of today is as committed to that because they're coming to our agency in droves. We hired over 2,000 people last year. We have met our diversity numbers, and they're not. So we met the numbers. We're going to get better at the numbers. So we're at 41% women hires across STEM community fields across our entire organization, and hiring this year across that 2,000. We're at 33 or 32% for minority. Where we really did really well this year and excited about was in our area of disability hiring, which is a cultural shift for people to come to work for an agency like ours, a defense agency, believe that they can contribute because they can. And so we were at a 2% goal. We're at over 3% today. We were at a 12% goal for overall. We're at 18% today of that over 2,000 folks. We have another huge hiring year coming up. And it is the questions that we're going to talk about today that are concerning to most coming in. Where am I going? How will I develop? What are you going to offer me? What can I offer? What projects will I be on? How am I going to contribute specifically? And what we don't want is to dupe them, right? And that's the concern that happens. When I worked in Georgia, the exciting part about being in a small site like that was that about 70% of our population between the military and civilian were millennials and Gen Xers. And if you ever want to be in an exciting, revolutionary environment, join a group of millennials and Gen Xers who are never far from questioning anything that's in front of you. And if you just listen, they might have a solution. They might be smarter than we are. And I say that sarcastically, they are smarter. We have a high school work study program I'll share, and then I'll stop. A high school work study program where we hired 186 kids from around the nation in regions, to include our centers in Georgia, Hawaii, Denver, and Georgia, Hawaii, Texas, and Denver. And they are joining us for a year. So that's affecting the youth of the country today to come into organizations like ours. So it's exciting. There's work to be done. The work is moving forward. The community is united in a way that it's never been before. That's a great sign. And I think we're going to have great success again this year. So,
excellent, thank you. What I want to do, so just in terms of scoping, first, we're not going to delve into the questions of security clearances, I think, too much in this panel. That could consume an entire panel just to discuss the security clearance challenges, and in fact, it will consume an entire panel this afternoon. So please save all your burning questions around security clearance reform for the panel this afternoon. It's obviously an integral part of the workforce and recruiting and development and the whole career cycle for people in this ecosystem, but it's a big topic in and of itself. Second, I think what I'd like to do is I think I want to try and capture the sort of state of how recruiting works today, understand sort of the career life cycle of both military and civilian. Also want to try and get into the contractor ecosystem as well. Certainly contractors are well represented in the room here and understanding the interplay there. And then from there look at really what the future could hold as we think about how views of careers are fundamentally changing and people have lots of micro careers rather than one long career. What that means in terms of developing and sustaining a workforce in this ecosystem. So first, why don't we kick it off with Jen? Could you share a little bit about what sort of the recruiting and development ecosystem looks like today within for typical uniformed member of the military?
Sure, so I'm actually going to, I won't just touch on uniform, I'm actually going to talk on service issues, because service issues are different, and we have civilians in our workforce that are extremely important and valuable to our mission, as well as our enlisted and our officer perspective. So from a recruitment perspective, on the uniform side, we actually in the ISR enterprise do not have problems recruiting the people that we need. We have enough people who have STEM skills. We have enough people who have linguistic skills. We have enough people that want to be intelligence analysts and do that job for the time that we recruit them. The same thing on the civilian side. We have people who are dying to get in. I think that all of us are seeing an increase in the desire to serve, the increase in the desire to be a part of a unique mission set and be able to be a part of it for whether it's in the Air Force, whether it's in another service, or whether it's in a national agency. On the cyber side, we do have issues, and for us within the Air Force, we have an A2 and an A6. So we have combined our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and we've combined cyber effects operation. And so our cyber effects operations is our offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, as well as our expeditionary cyber capabilities. And so we are now responsible for recruiting both of those as well as the ISR side. And the two are very much linked intrinsically, so we have to make sure that we consider that. So some of the issues that we're dealing with on the uniform side for cyber is trying to find those people who have those skills and bringing them in quickly. We are looking at direct commission, so that people who have skills and abilities can get in much faster, as well as looking at if you have experience that maybe you don't need to go through 9 months of training, that you have done it at Google, you have done it at Microsoft, you have done it in any of the other big companies, and we can give you credit for that without having to send you to tech school to learn something you've been doing in your private sector life for the last 5 to 7 years. Development-wise, we are always looking to see how do we develop our workforce better. And right now, a lot of the rhetoric out there is talking about how do we hire more data analysts? How do we hire more software engineers? How do we hire people that have these unique skills? I am of the opinion that we actually need to look at how do we upskill our current workforce so that they understand not only how to use data, what data means, but then also allow them the opportunity to do those types of jobs and skills so that we have a more well-rounded workforce, so that when we look at things like human-machine teaming and how do we develop, analyze, and get away from answering the questions of what happened to the questions of what's next, which is even more valuable and important, we have the workforce that can do that.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious, when you start thinking about mid-career hiring and recruiting, sort of the adage in the intelligence community in particular is that it's easy to get in the door well, to a certain extent as an entry-level position, right? There are also opportunities to come in at more senior levels, but sort of that mid-career band within the intelligence community and national security ecosystem more broadly it can be a challenge for recruiting. So Cece, I'm curious, is there any thought to that level of recruiting and how to improve there?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me speak again about the right, trusted, agile workforce. So what we've been looking at is, to your point, not just bringing in people fresh out of school, but also how do we get those experts at the right time, leverage that intellectual capital, and be able to apply it to some of the challenges that we have. So we received legislation in 2017, something called multi-sector workforce, and it's really getting a better understanding of, it doesn't matter what color your badge is, but also leaning on a lot of the authorities that we have with regards to term hires and other different mechanisms by which we can leverage that talent in a just-in-time fashion. So we're not just looking at bringing in people fresh out of school and growing them, because we know that based on the landscape today, the gig economy and things like that, that, you know, people don't want to necessarily dedicate their entire career to one institution or one particular occupation. They want some flexibility. They have a lot to bring to the table, and they want to be able to just know, how can I bring this piece of what I have? Like, for example, as a linguist, I want to spend some time working with languages, but at the same time, I've got amazing critical thinking skills, and I want to do some analysis work. Or, you know what, I care a lot about people, and I want to spend some time really understanding, how do we bring people on board? And how can I spend some time as a recruiter or branding the community? So we want to be able to bring people in at the right time, at the right place. And we're really looking at all the different authorities that we have, to your point, much more closely. We have continuous interagency discussions. As Donny mentioned, we're working much more closely as a community, and also leveraging best practices across the different agencies on how people have been able to do that in a more expedient fashion. So we really are looking at how do we bring people at different stages in their career, because it's not always the right time that you want to spend your time working in this particular mission set, and we appreciate that. So we want to come to you. As I noted, we're really looking at the employee experience of that future workforce as well as our current workforce. We even have some different types of recruitment strategies that we're leaning in on. In fact, we have one down, because one of the things we're looking at is not expecting everybody to come to us, but how can we go to the talent and approach them? So one of the things we're doing in Alabama, in fact, later on this month, in September, we're organizing a first ever IC STEM regional recruitment event where we're going to have over 11 of our 17 organizations who will be sending representatives to the University of Alabama. Yes, it is a university, but what we're looking at is the relationships we have with faculty as well, and really broadening the discussion in terms of what we're looking for, in terms of not just we're going to grow you, but also if you already have that expertise, how can we plug you in right now? So that'll be a great event. It's very different for us because we're looking at different occupations. So we'll have tables set up based on the occupation and experts in those occupations talking about the kind of work that's done there. Not just in terms of within one agency, but more broadly, and really trying to explain what your experience could be if you come into our community. We also have a new platform, not relatively new, it's actually our NSA partner that's working that for us. It's IC Applicant Gateway. For you all, it's called intelligencecareers.gov. And when you send your resume into that particular recruitment platform, it's not just shared with one particular organization. The goal is it'll be shared across. And little by little, more of our agencies are starting to become part of that platform and getting access to those resumes. So you can have much more deep conversations in terms of understanding, yes, I can apply my skills right now at NSA, but also, you know, I might also be considered for a particular opportunity in the NRO or going into one of the service intel organizations. So it'll open up the opportunities that might be there for you. And once again, it's not just at entry level, it's also at mid-career.
So one observation I think I'll share is that there are a lot of innovative initiatives that are happening as part of the human capital arms of the different agencies and apparatuses. But I personally have observed there's sometimes a disconnect between the things that the human capital arms of the agencies are doing to improve workforce and the actual line management and execution of that mission. So Loren, you talked about having 20 minutes of a confirmation hearing focus on workforce. So I'm curious, what should the agency executives be doing, and in particular line management that's not part of the human capital organization? What cultural shifts are needed, and how can we drive those cultural shifts?
That's a great question with so many answers. I'll start with a couple of examples that I have seen across the federal government writ large that could offer lessons to other parts of agencies. And these don't just exist in the places I'm talking about, but I thought they were good examples. The one cultural shift that needs to happen within a lot of the line agencies is, I'll give an example. During my career, there was a huge disconnect between the folks that I worked with in my office day to day, whether it be in defense strategy or budgeting or other matters, and the people who were actually hiring the folks that were going to ultimately come into our office. And I know that's true in much of the federal government, where the people doing the substantive work have very little connection to the people who are going to be hiring individuals into that office at whatever level. And that's not universally true, but a pilot that I found really interesting, it wasn't really a pilot, at the U.S. Digital Service was they said, this is BS, we can't actually manage our workforce this way. They hired an amazing recruitment and talent management team and had them integrated with rotating specialists who were doing the U.S. Digital Service core work on a regular basis, but then they would rotate into the recruitment team and have them basically hold the hand of the recruit throughout the entire process. Not just how do you apply, how do you get in, what are your benefits, how are you going to make the move to DC and so forth, but here's the work you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. Here's the people you're going to be working with. It's a fascinating almost fear of if you actually talk to a recruit throughout their recruitment process about what work they're going to do, who their office mates are going to be, what their life is going to be like, that you'll scare them away, that you're breaking some kind of rule. A lot of that is cultural and not actually real policy and process. And a lot of agencies are doing really good at breaking that down. But I think we need to, in so many cases, have far better connections between the people who are going to be managing, working with, partnering with the recruits on a day-to-day basis and the people who are actually going through the 1 year, even 2 year recruitment process with them. The other thing that I would say, well, actually, I'll leave it at that, and then I'll come back with some other questions later.
All right, thank you. So there's several questions from the audience about the national security workforce density that we have here in the National Capital Region, and the challenges that creates in terms of competition, the challenges it creates in terms of salary expectations, particularly as you have companies like Amazon moving to town, also creating tension and competition within that workforce. How do we get outside the Beltway in terms of developing a workforce? How can we have a national and distributed workforce? And in particular, given security classification challenges, is there infrastructure such as, I don't know, regional SCIFs, for example, that could be leveraged, that could promote increased teleworking and access to a broader workforce in areas that have lower cost of living and therefore may not have the same salary pressures? So, any takers?
Yes, if I may. So that is another piece of the right trusted agile workforce. We call it beyond the Beltway, out of the SCIF. Very much to your point, is really exploring areas and pieces of work that could be done in an unclassified setting, and also getting out of the DC metro area, and that's what we mean by beyond the Beltway, and going to where the talent hubs currently reside. And so that's why I mentioned Alabama, which is growing and becoming a very large S&T center. And so one of the things we're seeing some of our agencies starting to relocate there, and what we want to do is let's tap that talent that's already located there instead of bringing some of our DC workforce down to Alabama. There's tons of talent already there in place, and how can we leverage that talent? So we're really looking at different labor markets and working with our partners in new and innovative ways in the private sector too, to understand how can we be at the right place at the right time. I'll keep echoing that, right trusted agile workforce.
So I'd like to address that from the Armed Services perspective. And the reserves and the National Guard are a valuable asset that we all need to make sure that we consider and continue to consider, because these people are in their communities, they live and work and breathe in the local environments, they understand what the private sector is doing, and many of them have jobs in STEM organizations or in technological organizations or work for some of these big contractors, big private sector companies. And the way that we are able to do that is by having a distributed environment where people still have security clearances, and on nights and weekends or for so many days a year they work to support the services and the intelligence community, and then the rest of the time they're working on the same problems or very similar problems in their day-to-day jobs. And being able to identify and understand and also acknowledge that they have skills from outside of formal training that they have received within the intelligence community is vital to us being able to maintain the relationships with those people as well as retain their capabilities within the intelligence community.
Great, thanks.
So if I could add to it as well. So beyond the people scope, NSA began that decentralization about 2005. That's what opened up the cryptologic centers in Texas, Hawaii, Georgia, Colorado. So we have a distributed enterprise. 9/11 taught us to have that, right? And then it also then opened up the opportunity for talent. But I wouldn't say that was our primary focus. It is turning to that focus today as we now use those regional hubs as what we're using this year in our strategy for hub and spoke outreach, where we will spend time in a region and go to several schools by showing up for a career fair or a professional event. And when we look at mid-level, it's those professional organizations we're tapping into. It's not sometimes that, it's sometimes mid-level professionals don't see themselves coming into government. And so now we're tapping into a virtual media strategy that allows us to tap into things like TED Talks and Xbox and attract people who would not normally think of NSA as an employer of choice at that mid-level career opportunity. So we've had a distributed enterprise for quite a while now. It was for mission assurance purposes largely, and it is now morphing more into that human capital strategy as well.
Okay. So there's several questions from people from the university ecosystems, all very interested in how they can help. So I guess what are the, if you had to rank the top skills that you're looking for today when you are out engaging in these career fairs, what are the most in-demand skills? What are you having the most challenges recruiting for? And then I guess to build on that, what other things could universities be doing to produce even better talent? What are the, whether it's a class or it's some form of experiential learning, what are the things that you wish universities were providing that maybe they could?
I can start with that. So from a university perspective, I think one of the big things that we desire is critical thinking skills. We can train almost, and also a desire to learn, a desire to be curious, to understand what the current state of the world is. Because we can train almost anything else, but if you don't have a natural curiosity to learn and understand how the world works, it's much more difficult to do. The other thing that I think is really vital and important for people to know in the university system who are interested in coming into national security is to look around you and understand the implications of who you meet, the relationships you build, and the foreign interaction you have, because that can impact your ability later on to get a security clearance. And I know we're not going to talk about security clearances in the timelines, but one of the big limiting factors we see are people who come in with amazing skills and amazing experiences, but they have such a vast and intricate and interwoven network of foreign contacts that it's almost hard to extricate themselves from it to be eligible for a clearance.
So I don't recruit into the federal government anymore, but I think about it, but I do recruit into the nonprofit world and help young professionals across the community. And one big challenge that I'm seeing today is that when I was in grad school 15 years ago, it was common to have a master's degree in international affairs with a specialization on Europe and Russia, or international affairs with a specialization on Asia with focus on China. And that's great. Those are really useful skills to have. You talked about in your remarks how one of the things that we need to do in the workforce today is upskill the present workforce in terms of data analytics, artificial intelligence, more technical skills. I would love it if I saw that upskilling happen at in the policy education community at the master's level and the undergraduate level. So you're not just becoming a specialist in China, but you also understand how China is employing artificial intelligence. You're not just becoming a specialist in Russia, you understand how Russia is employing information operations. So you're melding both the regional and technical skills in a way that I don't see in undergraduate and graduate level education across the country today. There are some great programs that go far more technical than others, but I see the need for having that blend of skills far more into the S&T side, more on the research and development side today, as importantly as you did 10, 15 years ago, so that I knew about nuclear policy or I learned about defense planning. The quantum, AI, data analytics, many other things are going to become as important for national security professionals in the future as those were 10, 15 years ago for my peers.
Any other thoughts? Donny, Cece?
Go ahead, you go first.
So we work really closely with the universities today, and what I'd ask is, and they are eager, it's that appreciating and understanding the true missions of what's happening in the government, and then they can do it through programs like Centers of Academic Excellence. Also, it's the opportunities for us to come on campus, not just for a career fair, but to come on campus for tech talks or code breaker challenges. And the skill sets we're looking for are the obvious ones that we've heard all day that we need: computer science, engineers, mathematicians. But I don't want us to forget about the other skills that it takes this village to be able to be successful, which are the business managers, the contract specialists, the finance managers, the police officers, the security specialists, the investigators, the analysts, the language analysts. It is a huge community that is required. So every school has an opportunity to contribute to that environment. And I believe there's a lot of people who self-select out of coming into the world of cyber because they believe they have to be a computer scientist or engineer to do that. Mm-hmm. They do not. They can contribute in many different ways to that community. So it is the education of the student body, I would say, by universities to help them appreciate where they can contribute. And it's not just towards government. The USDS is a perfect example. The gentleman who currently is the head of that, came from Google but started his career at NSA. When we look at residencies and we look at opportunities, right, the way that government can invest in industry in a way that we couldn't monetarily, it's by allowing our talent the opportunity to go back out into industry and have impact and do things we cannot do for us in that space. So even today at the plenary session, Chris DeMay, Hawkeye, and you as well, started with a government agency and have now reached into the community that's affected us. So it is a large community, and I would just ask that universities look at that as the overarching goal.
So Donny mentioned Centers for Academic Excellence, and out of the OD&I, we are about to take over a program called the IC Centers for Academic Excellence, and that's where we spend time talking to the universities about developing curriculum that'll make their students more competitive to come work in the community. And so the program's been around for a while, and we are spending a lot of time now spending more time with that faculty to try, to Loren's point, look at where the future is taking us with artificial intelligence and quantum and such like that. We're very excited. We've had some very engaging conversations with a lot of the faculty because these universities, ultimately, they want to make their students more competitive for jobs, right? And so I think that program is headed in a wonderful direction. And in fact, we also bring some of those students back to us, and they interact directly with some of the line managers to hear about the work through simulations and also examples of some of the successes and some of the challenges that we have. And that's done every summer. So we really try to bring it to those students so they can really understand and see the reality behind some of the challenges that we have. Not what they see in Hollywood, but more in terms of this is what it is in the day-to-day. So we kind of manage the expectations to Loren's earlier point and Donny's. I mean, it's slow, right? We are in a federal government, we are in institutions, but we really are trying to leverage and move forward. And one of the other points I wanted to put forward is about multidisciplinary teams and the kind of skills that we're looking for. It's not just your traditional STEM, but we're also looking at critical thinking, but also that adaptability. Some people come to it and they're very excited about spending time in various portfolios, and some folks are really focused on, well, I just want to contribute here, right now, right there, but we're really trying to challenge them and explain to them and work with them because they have so much more to bring. So being adaptable and to that point of agile, right? Trusted agile workforce. We're looking for that too. When I mentioned the event that's coming up in Huntsville, Alabama in September, 21st of September, I stated that it's going to be set up with various occupations. So it'll be people speaking, line managers as such, about what it is, what that work entails. And there'll be some professionals in a multitude of different occupations, not just traditional analysts or some of the data science work or some of the other STEM type of professions. It was also, we'll have some tables talking about acquisition. How can you bring your business degrees and really apply that to some of the work that we need to do, as Donny noted. So we have examples of how we're trying to move out. So I'll just stop there.
Well, I will note that Hollywood is responsible for me starting my career at NSA. It was the 1990s movie Enemy of the State, where the NSA was chasing Will Smith around. I saw that movie and I said, I need to apply for a job there because they're awesome bad guys in that movie. So, maybe that should be part of the strategy. Anyway, so during the plenary session this morning, we heard some discussion about the Space Guard. There's a few questions that people have asked around reserve and guard programs and leveraging that as a tool as part of the workforce tool. Certainly, Sue Gordon has also talked about the desire to launch an AI ROTC program, for example. Right. So, are there things in that sort of toolbox, if you will, that could be leveraged in new ways to try and provide some diversity, also bring in non-traditional people to support some of the national security work? I'll start with.
Okay, so I alluded to this in my last remarks, and our Guard and Reserve are valuable partners for us because of the skills that they do bring. Many people wonder, well, how do we do it better? I would say that one of the things that we don't do is that when we bring people in, we don't really ask them where they've come from, where their skills are, who they currently work for. We don't track it, more importantly. So we may ask the initial question, but 5 years down the road, we don't go back to them and say, are you still at Google? Or have you moved someplace else? Are you working on a different project? Do you have different skills? What have you learned in your private sector, commercial company experience? And we also don't look to see, when we recruit them, where the best place to put them is and what they want to do. We still have a system where we look at where we have openings and gaps and try to fill those rather than looking at the talent that we have and try to find the best fit for them. And these are some of the things that we're trying to work through right now within Air Force ISR and trying to figure out how do we bring people in. And believe it or not, it's not that they want to be brought in at the highest ranks. They don't want to be brought in at as a reservist who is an officer even. Maybe they just want to serve. And they are happy doing technical work because that's what they do in their day-to-day job, even though they may be a senior executive. I actually laugh when you go to some of the Air Force bases out west near Silicon Valley, and you drive into the parking lot on a reserve weekend, and most people are driving really expensive cars. Mm-hmm. And it's because they are part of the Silicon Valley enterprise, and they're really just trying to do the mission and support the intelligence community with the skills that they have.
I want to talk about an issue that's very related to your question, but it has come up a lot in this present 2020 presidential election. I think maybe 2 or 3 of the candidates thus far have proposed some sort of form of national service or national service corps to bring in different individuals for different kinds of high tech or very high demand skill sets. And while I applaud their thinking, I would instead point them to looking at our current Guard and Reserve programs and other programs that we have are similar to that have a lot of bureaucratic challenges that either deter recruitment or deter retention from those programs over time. There was a viral Twitter thread the other day that I will mention because I know this experience is not unique, of folks who are naval reservists who spend months on deployment without getting paid. Multiple months, no matter what their rank, no matter what they're doing, no matter where they are overseas serving our country in the reserve system, and they have challenge after challenge in getting their travel reimbursed and getting their actual paychecks, getting what the support that they need in order to serve their country. That's not unique to the Naval Reserve in terms of different kind of bureaucratic challenges that are faced, because you end up seeing a lot of the administrative advancements that we find across the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, take a while to move down to to the Guard and Reserve in terms of actually supporting our service members and others who are part of that network. That is what actually needs to be solved with all these national service calls. We have programs to bring in people at the highest skill levels in a lot of high demand areas for the requirements across the country. We're just not doing all that we can to actually fix the problems to bring the folks in at the right place and the right time at all levels across the world. I know that folks on this panel are doing a lot of work in that space, but whenever I hear somebody say national service is the way to go, we've got a great national service program. We just haven't fixed all the challenges with it.
So for us, it's very different. You know that at NSA, the leader of our organization is General Nakasone, and the deputy is a senior civilian. So we're already integrated with military, and we do leverage National Guard and reservists in that capacity as well. In our satellite locations, we're about a 65-35 split military, 65%, and here locally we're about a 50-50. So they're already a strong member of our team.
Is there something on the civilian side, though, that could complement that, to provide similar opportunities for the DoD civilians? Again, such a program doesn't exist today, but right, could that be a useful tool in the workforce?
So I will tell you that I reviewed draft legislation, say that word, yesterday on that exact same thing. And so they're talking about it as to how do we deal with and how do we support civilian workforce as well as people who want to maintain their affiliation with their private sector company and continue to abide by ethics laws and some of the other challenges that which currently exist. So I know that there are some proposals out there to address that. It's just a matter of how do we get from point A to point B at this point in time.
And I just want to couple on what Loren, I think there are mechanisms that we're able to do that on the civilian side. We've done it through advisory board channels where we brought people onto our advisory boards. We have brought talent in at high levels from corporations that had talents we needed. There is a way to do it, but the bureaucracy and the difficulty of that for a person of that caliber is not tenable, I don't think, in some cases. Right. So I think that is part of the challenge.
Certainly there are mechanisms like IPAs, bringing people from academia,
Yep.
HQEs, similar for bringing in people for term-limited appointments. The challenge I've seen, even when I personally have tried to explore using some of them as part of my own career, is the salary is not competitive, even at the caps of those programs, with what they would see in industry. And there is this looming specter of conflict of interest, right? And that seems to clog up the works every time you try to do something creative with one of those programs. I'm curious, are we too concerned about conflict of interest and those interconnects? Certainly there's been a number of high-profile things in the media recently around that conflict of interest, but how do we do better with managing the conflict and ethics concerns associated with some of these more dynamic workforce programs?
So I have an opinion on that. So the draft legislation that I actually reviewed was looking at developing sort of a civilian reserve program where they maintain their job in the private sector while they come and do nights and weekends, 2 weeks out of the year. I'm just kind of trying to encapsulate what the program looks like, but they don't put on a uniform, and they continue to be a civilian. Some of the concerns were on what are the conflicts of interest and how do you try to avoid that? The thing that I want to caution everyone on is that there were a lot of blanket statements that were being discussed in this review of this legislation on, well, we just need to make sure that if the company that they're with is dealing in anything that they're related to, that they have to be removed from that activity. And I replied back and said, well, the defense industrial base, especially the large contractors that we have, are involved in every aspect of national security. So there is no way that you can say that if somebody works for a large contractor that they now have a conflict of interest related to everything. So I think we need to look at the specific thing that they're working on, the specific program that they're working on, and addressing each individual as an individual and not as a body who works for a contracting company.
On top of which, you see this problem a lot when people are wanting to go into the federal government at a political appointee level in terms of their investments and possible conflicts associated with that. Kraft is one of the biggest suppliers or contractors of the Department of Defense. If you've invested in Kraft macaroni and cheese and on the associated companies from there, you have to divest of that because you're going to become a DoD senior appointee. There's a lot of things in our ethics rules that end up making not a lot of sense in terms of practical application. I think there's some interesting lessons in terms of how the intelligence community, not to go into clearances, but is doing a more personalized continuous monitoring of individuals for their clearances. There's a conflict of interest corollary that I think could be interesting to pursue, particularly given that we have seen former general officers, former senior executives who go out and pursue insane, highly illegal conflicts of interest with very few repercussions. There's a problem in our system overall that is not going to be fixed by saying that you can't bring in a Google employee with high demand skills because they might have a possible conflict in surveying your country.
So if I may, let me just chime in and just say that I think the panel pretty much has said it all in terms of there's risk, and then there's also authorities that are out there, and it's just a balance, right? So it's a question of what's the right skill at the right time, and what's the risk we're willing to take in order to bring that skill in. And we do have tons of mechanisms and many examples of how we've brought in experts at certain levels just for a short period of time to focus on a particular challenge. So I don't think it's one solution is going to solve all these different quests. So I think there's a lot of people who are out there who have tried to come in and tried to bring their experience, and for some reason or another, they haven't been able to do that. But I don't think that it's necessarily across the board. I think there's examples of both successes as well as some of the slower efforts to date. And in terms of a core, I think there were a while back, there might have been discussion, it might still be in place, and forgive me, I wasn't mentioning that before, but a national senior language core in terms of language skills that we needed at certain times. So I think there are, once again, examples throughout our intelligence community and the 17 different IC elements where people have been successful in bringing in that expertise when they needed to bring it on board. IPAs, HQEs, and also our contractor workforce, which is present today. They bring their skills all the time. So
Sure.
Your point about salaries, I don't think we come to do this mission for high pay. Right? We're here dedicating our time, our passion, our energy, and our expertise towards national security.
Yeah, so with respect to salary, I think it's interesting. For many years, the debate was federal GS pay versus what you could make working for a defense contractor. I think in the last 5 years, particularly in the National Capital Region, we've seen that dynamic change even further with some of the big tech companies opening up larger footprints here that creates sort of a third echelon. So I know the government contractors in the room are very concerned about their ability to compete with the salaries of the Googles and the Amazons when they have constraints associated with labor category, pay rates, and so forth. I'm curious if there's how do we extend this conversation to include the GovCon ecosystem? And does that get into more acquisition questions than workforce questions? Do these need to be kind of handled jointly in order to be successful?
So I will say that if you look at the average salary of most of the employees that are going to be coming into some of those larger tech companies, they're on par with what we currently provide in the government as well as within the government contracting sector. People tend to escalate the average of those salaries because you look at the senior executives who have extremely high pay, which then skews the distribution of the average pay across the workforce. It's just like the housing issue in Arlington County. Everybody went hyperactive when Amazon announced that they were coming in, but in reality, the majority of the workforce is going to be coming in at entry level. So we need to make sure that we, as a national security enterprise, take that into consideration across the board.
I'll also add that it's there tends to be an assumption that people are going to work for Amazon and Google and other places because you get really great snacks and you have fun game rooms and things like that. And my husband worked at Google. Those are really cool, I won't lie. But one of the reasons that we really liked being at Google is because my son was born shortly thereafter and my husband got 4 months of paternity leave, no questions asked. And it was basically pushed out the door, don't you dare come into the office, don't check your email, go do that. And some of these are cultural, and some of it's also policy, where there are high demand benefits and incentives that the federal government and also much of the more I don't mean politically conservative, I mean like occupationally conservative defense contracting community haven't pursued, whether it be maternity, paternity leave, flexible work schedules, the ability to work from home occasionally when you need to, if you're still able to get the job done. We are much more conservative in much of the federal workforce and all the associated communities than a lot of the folks who are going into some of these jobs want to pursue. And there's a lot of changes that are going on with that, but until Congress and others allow some of the more modern incentives and benefits to take place within these workforces, I think you're still going to see a lot of competition with Google and Amazon because they want the kind of lifestyle it affords them, not just the snacks.
So that's really interesting. The benefits part is an interesting question. I'm curious if the Right Trusted Agile Workforce Initiative has anything specifically looking at the benefit side.
What we're really focused on is ensuring that people are aware of the flexibilities. So flexibilities more in terms of being able to work sometime on government problems and then go back out to the private sector or back to your academic organization, back and forth, and being able to bring your intellectual capital at that right point in time. In terms of benefits, I know that there is legislation that's out there in terms of even opening up the doors to make it easier for us to move our current workforce. So when we talk about development of our current workforce, how are we going to get them the skills so they can retool? And sometimes that does reside in the private sector. So being able to move our folks out there to be able to work in the Googles, in the Amazons, places, if it makes sense at that time, we are exploring that. And in terms of flexibilities, we do already have some, and I think in some cases it might be an education, to your point, and a culture issue in terms of not being able to manage a more flexible workforce and what that entails. And there is a lot of work being done on that. I mentioned the National Intelligence Strategy and that particular objective that's focused on the people. There is a sub-objective that looks at an investment at our mid-level managers and making sure that they're resourced with the knowledge and the authorities to be able to manage this diverse workforce. Diverse and also diverse in the sense that they want a variety of different things and understanding that what is allowed. And a lot of that is also driven by mission. And I think that sometimes people come into a particular organization and they see their peers being able to leverage certain flexibilities, but because of the mission that they're in, they're not going to be able to do that. So sometimes you have to be adaptable and there's some trade-offs, and people have to be real about that too.
So I just want to touch on the cultural piece. In the past year, General Nakasone was able to, for the agency, create a civilian fitness program where we were actually able to, 3 hours a week, use our time to go and do physical workout. And interestingly enough, the comments I heard were, I wonder what's going to happen to productivity. Because if you're not chained to your desk, right, you're not working.
Clearly you're not working.
Yeah, and so what it's proven is, don't have the data, but I will tell you, from a personal perspective, it increases my productivity. When I get done my workout, I come back and I will work 2 more hours when I've only probably would have worked 1 more hour. And there is data and science behind that proves that that's beneficial for a workforce. What I'm also preventing is for illness and sickness. And if you've sat at an agency where a large portion of your work is sitting at a desk looking into a computer, snacks are your enemy, right? So it gets people up and out of their space. I worry there is a ton of flexibility for people in an agency like in the IC when it comes to flexible work schedules, when it comes to telecommuting. It really does boil down to culture and the acceptance of those things and enforcing them or allowing people to exercise that right. So I believe those things exist. I've exercised them myself, but it is what you say. I think sometimes people have to get that mission creativity, right? Maybe not all missions can, but I believe some that don't can and won't. And then on the cyber workforce, that cyber core, I would say one thing, if we were going to do that, I'd like to see it modeled after the USDS kind of model for creativity and innovation, right? So that's where they come in for 3 to 4 months at a time from industry. They're hired at the highest 15-10 grade. Everybody has the same grade. There's no competition. They have an incredible talent workforce that keeps that model moving, and so nothing gets lost. So there's constant transfer of data and information, and it's seamless in that perspective, but they have a ton of non-bureaucratic freedom to do that, which if I were looking at a core to be innovative in the cyber and challenge and bring people in like that, it would be under that same model of the USDS if I were talking out loud.
Can I have a closing point, kind of wrapping up my first one in this on leadership and this one we've been talking about recently on culture? One of the challenges I see in the intelligence community, in the State Department and DoD and elsewhere is that when people employ these flexible authorities to go out and work in the private sector or do a rotation at the National Security Council or do a rotation to become the spokesperson for their agency, they are not it's not that even that they're not rewarded for it, it's that the experiences that they bring are not necessarily understood or appreciated. People don't follow up on what to do with that. That requires leadership to see that it's necessary to not only allow people to do this, but also to understand what are they getting out of it and how can I take advantage of it in ways that are going to be beneficial to the agency. State Department right now is having a really hard time recruiting a deputy spokesperson because their last several deputy spokespeople have not been able to advance in their careers because of perceived politicization. People at the Department of Defense who rotate the National Security Council presume that they're going to have to leave because they're not able to find a job on return because of whatever weird relationship issue. You see this over and over again across agencies where highly competitive developmental experiences on the inside and outside of government are either not understood, valued, or appreciated, and therefore they feel as though they don't have much of a place in it. That requires leadership to say, I can change that model and utilize all the amazing flexible experiences that my workforce has.
And I'll reinforce the culture thing. I know even now in my new role at MITRE, I see we try to offer our employees a professional development opportunity, but their government person is expecting them to be at their desk 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day, and if one of our folks is going to go take a class that will broaden their skills or develop them professionally, the question is, well, why aren't you here at your desk? I'm paying for my 2,000 hours a year, and I want to see you there. So I think the same cultural things that could affect the civilian workforce side would also help ease a lot of the cultural issues that you see with a lot of the contractors who are working on site. Okay, well, we are almost out of time. We have about 7 minutes left. So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to give a couple closing comments. And I'd really like you to kind of project into the future. What are the pilot programs that are happening now that you think could fundamentally change the way the workforce operates in 10, 20 years? And what does the opportunity look like?
Okay, so we have, within the Air Force ISR Enterprise, we actually have 2 pilots, and I'll briefly talk about both of them that I think could change how we do things. One is started in Air Force Intelligence, and it has actually expanded to the broader Air Force. It's called the Computer Language Initiative. The idea is that we assess people and reward them and pay them for their understanding, knowledge, and ability to code in computer languages regardless of their job. So think of people who have foreign language skills. When you take a test, you have a certain proficiency, and then you are paid on a monthly basis to maintain that proficiency. We are rolling that out across the Air Force and doing the exact same thing. I think that is an incentive that will allow for increased understanding, development, as well as desire to potentially use those skills and retain those skills. And we're seeing, we've had about 2,000 people across the Air Force come in and do the initial assessment. The second one is how we actually develop our workforce. We traditionally, within the intelligence community, develop all of our own courseware. We maintain it, we update it, but it's usually not on a very consistent cycle. It may not maintain or have the same refresh rate as the private sector. We are trying to push towards using private sector development types of training, courseware, and education for those things that are universal to all, and then only looking to develop those things that we need that are classified that someone else cannot provide for us. And that way takes the burden off of us for a lot of our training, but also allows us to remain on the cutting edge of where we are in the private sector.
There are so many pilots I could commend to all of you. So instead of listing dozens of them, I will say that 10 years into the future, what I hope will have transformed the national security workforce is that we will have brought together, basically have maybe a conference like this or something else, will be every pilot runner across the federal government gets together and says, here's what's working and here's what's not working with my pilot. And to be able to share those lessons more productively than I see across the agencies now. The intelligence community has good intra-community conversations. DoD sometimes does. The broader national security network, who is dealing with a lot of the same challenges, even as they have very different workforces, is not doing as good a job as they could in sharing the lessons in recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. I think that some of those conversations could happen on a more consistent basis, and they can happen with Congress, so Congress stops trying to create 1 million cyber corps, which maybe is a great idea, but we don't need 5 of them across the federal government. Maybe we just need 1.
So when we look to the future, I've already mentioned several times the right trusted agile workforce. So when we think about 10 years out, what we're imagining that we will see is people moving in and out. It doesn't matter, as I mentioned, what color your badge is. It doesn't matter if you're new to the community or if you're coming in mid-level or even senior level. We have retirees who have left and then they come back because their knowledge can really help us in terms of expediting some of the problems or challenges that we're faced with. So really, it's a question of what are you ready and prepared to do and how you're ready to contribute. So what we're imagining is people will be coming in, moving in and out with great fluidity, and not just in the DC metro area. We'll be able to tap talent across the United States. As Donny mentioned, we have many agencies that have presences across the country and are already tapping that talent. We don't want to make everybody move here. We want to come to you, and we want to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to contribute your talent. And that's with regards to the future workforce, as well as the current workforce. Those folks who work for us today, they have made a commitment. They have made certain sacrifices to work in our environment, whether it's pay or whether it's other certain flexibilities. And we want to really respect that, and we do every day because we continuously invest in that future work, in that current workforce. We have a wonderful national intelligence university. In fact, they have a booth here today talking about the different types of graduate and certificate programs that they make available to the entire intelligence community workforce. That's just one example of how we're consistently trying to retool and invest in our talent. We also have, to Loren's point, that mobility. So joint duty program, that's something been in place for years where we're moving people across the intelligence community, also out to other federal government agencies so they can experience different cultures, expand their network, and then work closely and bring that back when they come back to their home organization. So reintegration, no, it's never easy, but a lot of that is a mix, right? It's being able to speak to your own skills and how you can bring that to bear. So I would have to say, having been in the community over 25 years, it really has changed drastically in a very positive way. We have amazing people who are working with us every day, and it's been a thrill to be a part of this community, and I'm really looking forward to the next 10 to 12 years, because I think it's some exciting times as we start to see artificial intelligence, automation, and all come into being part of our workforce and how we work with that artificial intelligence moving forward.
So I can't really add much to what Cece said in the 10-year vision. But if I look a year, 2 or 3 years from now, next year I want to say that we successfully hired 2,000 people so I can stay in my dream job, number one. But most importantly, there are some things that we need to do to make that process much more amicable for those people we're trying to attract. And so what I'm hoping is going to happen is that we will begin to explore, as we are today, through technologies like Yellow and HireView and Handshake, commercial technologies that exist and can give us functionality that we so desperately need to stay connected with our applicants, that we move a lot of this to a more approachable, attainable environment for the people we're working with to hire, and that so that the transparency and communication and the care of those applicants through this, at times, year-long process. We don't hear a lot from people that the year-long process is troublesome. They don't like a year, but they would get it if they could only hear from us, right? If they only knew where they were in the process, if we could be more transparent, if they could go online and access where they are, right? So a future state for me is 2 years from now that there's an app that we connect with every one of our applicants. That's future state. and that we are continuing to attract, because we don't have a problem attracting a rich, diverse workforce to our agency, that it continues to be healthy. Competition is what you make of it. This is one community that needs every one of the talent pools that are in there, and all we have to make sure is that the community attracts that pool together and we actually can leverage them. So future state for me is that we become more approachable, more attainable, that we are more communicative. Technology is a great resource, but it is still a high-touch environment. If I want people to get to know who I am, I've got to shake their hand. I have to look in their eyes. I have to commit to them, and then I have to be communicative. So technology is great, but that's my future state.
All right, well, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists. So that concludes the session. The next thing on the agenda is the networking lunch, which is back over in the exhibit hall. So look forward to seeing everyone there.